welcome everybody to this session on the data we have and data we need. I'm just glad to be taking the baton from Ritesh because we had such a great session on content creation, the availability and the creation of data in wide range of sectors, which has largely disrupted the retail and the e-commerce as it happens, at least in the Indian context. In this panel discussion, however, we try to look at the other side of the moon, which is the areas that significantly lack data despite the big data revolution within which we sit at the minute. So I would like to just immediately introduce the two panelists that we have with us today. The first one is Lalit, who is the CEO of SenseGrass. He comes from a series of founding companies. This is the second in his list at the minute, and SenseGrass is an agri-tech startup which has its own custom-grade sensor that promises to measure 14 parameters from the soil and offer intelligence on the nutrients and carbon management for crop. The other panelist we have with us today is Parth. He has 8 years of scientific experience at ISRO, which is the Space Research Organization of India. And currently he's serving as an entrepreneur in residence with SatSure. A little bit about SatSure. It's a space tech startup that is looking to offer decision insights through satellite imagery, complemented with a lot of ground societal data to bring knowledge and intelligence and evidence-based science to sectors such as agriculture, environmental sustainability, and such. It's great to have you both on the panel today. Without further ado, I would like to shoot my first question. With big data, we are also noticing a big divide. There are some sectors which have undergone momentous change because of the availability of data, like the retail and e-commerce. And there are some which are languishing in some sense of speaking. The natural systems, our societal, social systems, our administrative systems. What is your personal observation on this, and how has it motivated your association with the startup ideas that you're currently associated with? We may start, with Lalit first, and then, so I'll try to be fair between the two and balance one over the other at times.
First of all, thank you, Saumya. Thanks for the warm intro, and good evening, everyone. And I think before I'll answer this question, I think we need to know what is the big data, right? Especially for the young audience. So the big data, for us, is a very unstructured, large component of the information which is available in the ecosystem, and you have to be combined all together in a such a meaningful way that will comes as a product for you. So I think when we talk about the agriculture, and I think you have given a very good example, when we talk about the other industries like fintech, retail, we have a very structured data, right? We have an available abundance of data. But when we talk about the agricultural and climate change kind of sector, I think the most important part is that these are available, but in bits and pieces, and how you going to combine those bits and pieces information into a structural data that is going to be converted into the use cases. And I think before I'll jump, how we're doing this in SenseGrass, and I think just to extend what I have explained about the bits and pieces of the data is, agriculture is one of the difficult industry. It's one of the largest market around the world, but it's also one of the difficult industry to work in because of so many reasons, right? You do not have the proper infra. Again, I'm talking about in terms of the context of Indian ecosystem. But even if I compare this with the US market and European market, where we are operating currently, pretty much the things are same, right? It's not that developed what we have seen in the other sector as well. So there are two challenges. The first challenge is that we have the lack of infra. And the second, your audience who usually provide these kind of data is not that tech savvy, right? Farmers or the other stakeholder as well. And I think now we need to work on those initial steps of putting all these big data in such a way where where we can utilize this information to come up with a very meaningful structure that will convert into the product, right? So I think in SenseGraph, what we're trying to build, we're trying to start from the scratch, which should be done 10, 20 years back, right? Collection of this data, generating of the data. So we have some sort of data available in the agricultural context, but then there are tons of information which we need to generate in the coming time. And that is a very important data. And I think the sensor and IoT, I mean, we definitely going to discuss all these in the later part of the webinar. But I think these are the initial context, what we are doing and what we have understood while working in the SenseGraph.
Great, Lalit. Thank you for that input. So, a key question that now I would like to shoot at Parth is this idea of dealing with interconnected systems. One of the reasons why agriculture is so tough, because it brings together a lot of complex systems before we can provide any sort of solution. Well, the availability of water, the climate factors that come into play, the dynamic soil conditions, and of course, the policies and the sort of market trends around what is mostly in consumption at one particular point. So, Parth, how are you dealing with this challenge of not just gathering data from ground, but also complementing it with the satellite data, and what additional challenges does that bring forth for you?
Thank you, Saumya. I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to check. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this panel. Hey, Lalit, great to meet you. Thank you, Saumya. This has been one of those fundamental questions which I, at least personally, before switching from ISRO to SatSure, have been asking myself. This big divide of data between the haves and the haves not. And it has been very challenging in the Indian context, as Lalit was rightly saying, that we have this big data, but it's so haphazard, it's not so much arranged, that it becomes very difficult to get insights out of it. And then we talk of a lot of uncertain things, as you rightly pointed about climate, the water facilities, the policies, and what ifs. What at SatSure, what we are trying to do, first of all, consolidate the things which are in our control, the kind of data which we can get. And here, satellites provide us a very good avenue to not only see what's happening right now, but also go into the past to understand what has happened in the previous years, what kind of crops were grown in a particular area, what kind of yield was there. This helps us to understand what has gone down over the years in that particular area, and how that can be complemented with various data which we are getting at present. It could be weather data, it could be soil moisture data, where IoT sensors used by SenseGraph and Lalit streams are like helping us a lot. And integrating this to come to arrive at a platform which is making decision easy for the implementers. And it could be financial institutions, it could be farmer produce organization, the FPOs, it could be the farmers themselves, the governments, the policy makers. So at SatSure, we are trying our best to consolidate the data from this space with the data on the ground in a way which not only impacts what's going on, but which also takes into cognizance what has happened over the year, so that we can arrive at what is going to happen in the times to come.
Great. So, this interesting follow-up to this, and which I myself wonder at times, starting research in this area at Plaksha, is the future viability of these sensors that we are working with today. In the sense that if there is no data, we should just create it. And so we start working on these sensors and collecting data through the satellite system and everything. But what are the bottlenecks in it? And to what extent can we keep this pipeline steadily flowing for the next 5, 10, 20 years? Is the larger question. And I just will try to contextualize it with that government does, do these surveys. But the problem with the government data that sits in sometimes in public departments siloed off is that it's not even of the same standard. It's not even, continuously updated. And there are talks to build these open digital ecosystems. So what are your views on this, and how do you see this sort of cyber infrastructure panning out in the future? So I guess I'll have Lalit go now.
Sure, Soumya, and I think that's an important question. I think you mentioned about like if we don't have the data, we have to generate the data. So I'll take it two step behind, right, to answer this question. When we talk about these IoT enabled services, right, whether we are in agriculture and all this stuff, this is a very long process, right? You cannot start generating the data in just 1 year or 2 years. So I'll give you an example about like being a developing and growing nation versus the developed nation, how the entire infra and how these big data comes from. So when we talk about the American market or European market, you have seen this is a like 40, 50, 60 years kind of work. They have keep setting up these kind of, infrastructure, sensors, the other data volumes which generate the data time to time. While in our case, I think it's happening in the last few years, especially again I'm talking about in the context of agriculture because this is what we are discussing today. So I think it cannot be done with it just simply within a startup like SenseGrass or SatSure or any other things, right? You have to be create a kind of a circle of stakeholder which is going to start generating these points, creating these points into the microservices, and they keep giving you the information. So again, coming back to like just to briefly describe, when at SenseGrass we I think when we started the company, we knew as a third generation farmer and as an entrepreneur, I think I knew that I'm taking a big risk because for a capital intensive and investor friendly market, if you own a hardware element in your company, it's a big rat flag for you being a founder, right? But even though I think the passion was about like at least at the end of the day, and someone has to do start creating that line of generating the data. And whenever we talk about the big data in the context of agriculture, the most important and the first primary tool is the IoT sensors, because this is going to give you the real data which you require for any such variable, whether these are yield output or fertilizer management, so on and so on. So I think the biggest thing is that you have to start generating these infrastructure while working with the private companies, startups like SenseGrass or any such companies, and putting all these information. And it's a long and very complex process to generate these information. And once you have this, and I think this is also defined the 5V of big data, like the volume and the value, what we usually talk about in the big data part, that whether this, first of all, that there are two things. The first, whether you have a data or not, and the second, if you have a data, whether this is a valuable data or not, whether this is a data which we can use or not for getting a valuable insight or not. So I think these are some of the things that we realize and we have started generating, because at the end of the day, the data is gold these days. I'm not talking about 30 or 40 years back or 20 years back, but if you see the current industry, whether this is in agricultural or any other such sector, the data is always considered to be gold. You're not going to feed the population with the food, you're going to feed the population with the data these days. So I think that's a important analogy which we need to understand while work on that big data part.
Interesting. I like you're going to feed your population through data. I like that statement. Parth, what is your view on this?
Yeah, so very rightly like explained by Lalit. Uh, I'll tackle this question from two perspectives. One is educating the masses and also the government. So right now, when like as SatSure, when we are operating in this agriculture, we have to collaborate a lot with government, and we are seeing that a lot of things have been done in the past 10 years, especially in the sense of digitization of land records. In some states, it has been done to a great extent. In some states, it's going on. But the kind of work, the tremendous ground force the government has put into it is really credible to see in a country like India, where education has not reached to the bottom part of the pyramid, where it's difficult to explain to people how data can be used to make their life easier. The government has done a great job. With that, it also comes as a responsibility for us as startups and also for bigger corporates, to educate the masses and also educate and sort of help the government to capture this data so that it can be put into a concrete pipeline which can start delivering products in the times to come. And there comes the point of when you said about how to create that pipeline for delivering it for the next 5 years. And as Lalit rightly said, that it's not easy that we get the data today and tomorrow we can get the products out of it. More so in the context of having sensors and hardware-based industry. Even with products like ours, what we are providing to various partners, it took us like 4 to 5 years of R&D, ground truthing, going into the ground, understanding things. So that thing has to be, I think, a lot of tenacity and a lot of sort of good positive hope has to come, that what we are working towards is like solving one of the biggest problem the world is going to face in the years to come, having food on the plate. If more and more people are leaving agriculture for better pastures or for better opportunities, we have to see that where we are going wrong as a nation, as the world, because it directly impacts the food production of the world. So in that sense, I think these two key factors would be very important, keeping in view how we progress from here to the next decade. We can say one is the educating not only the stakeholders but people, the whole ecosystem players, and then having the belief to put out that effort that will reap benefits after certain period of time.
Right. Thank you for that great insight, Parth, and also the idea about actually visiting the ground locations to get a sense of the precise problems and the precise solutions that fit those problems, rather than something that is stitched up in the office and then retrofitted to solve. My immediate lead up, and there are so many questions I can ask in this, because I'm myself sort of finding my space here. But the biggest question that arises, and I recently was discussing with somebody, is the lack of a good business proposition. And I'll try to summarize my question in two statements, which is 80% of the farmers in India are small and marginal. They do not have the sort of economy to support high-end technologically innovative products, right? And while we see that without food, the whole population of a country suffers, without good water, it suffers. But then how do we get the individuals, the citizens, or the government to pay for these technological innovations and to actually reduce this gap between availability and implementation? So I think I'll go, Parth, please take this question first, and then we'll move over to Lalit.
It's one of those questions which I remember I was just having the discussion in our SatSure team, that this was one of the biggest challenge we faced in India. As you said, rightly said, that 80% of the farmers have land holdings of less than 1 hectare, which becomes very challenging for any business proposition to come into place. So how we are tackling it at SatSure is sort of attacking it, or maybe approaching it from two different angles. One is the bottoms up approach and one is from top down. Agriculture is one of those agenda in Indian democracy and Indian political system, which plays heavily across the strata of society. So what we are trying to do is, first of all, have a top-down approach to see where our data can help decision makers, policy makers, the financial organizations and institutes to get those insights which can help them to make relevant policies, relevant products for the farmers, not only the big holding farmers, but for those small farmers who require credit for small things. And like I remember when I was visiting the ground for ground truthing purpose of SatSure, we understood that the major challenge with farmers is not only to get seeds or to get irrigated water or harvester they want loan for, but it comes to very small and very important family matters, getting their daughters married, sort of building a room in their house, or just building, sort of getting a tube well into their farm. And these are the things which gets out of the, what we can say, systematic or approachable credit rate route. So they have to heavily devote on uh, unofficial sources, the which are not into the main streamline and main pipeline of the fintech industry, and pay heavier interest. The interest we living in urban cities cannot even imagine, people paying like 30 to 40% per annum interest. So what we are trying to do here is helping government institutes, helping financial institutes to sort of uh, integrate our data into their platform and see where they can get really in those insights, and there where they can enable decision making, not for those institutes but also with the farmers. Coming to the second approach which we are approaching is bottoms up approach, and here definitely only the data from satellite cannot help. We need ground resources, we need a sort of collaboration with different players in the ecosystem. And here comes a very important aspect uh, of the technological challenges or changes which are coming into this century, which is open innovation. Not keeping the innovation within your ecosystem or within your startup or within your company, but just opening it up and collaborating with not only corporates, companies, startups, but universities, by organizations who are working on the ground, NGOs. So here we are sort of envisioning a sort of a sort of a data exchange, where we can bring our data, the other complementary resources and complementary partners from the ecosystem can bring in their data, and we combine it together, sort of put it into a pipeline and create products which directly impacts and enable decision making at the farm level. At the farmer level, where he can take insights and decide which crop would be better for him, what kind of revenues he can expect if we go with this kind of crop vis-a-vis this kind of crop. So these are the two things how we are trying to tackle this challenge of big data, and also the applicability and the business proposition for a startup, young startup like ours.
Right. What are your views on that, Lalit?
Soumya, so I think when we talk about the marginal and small to mid-scale farmer, I think we have around 118 million farmers in India and 550 million somewhere around the world, right? And they are the responsible for growing the majority of the crops. When we talk about the actual, let me break down into two parts, right? The first part is that let's assume we have the data, right, and we have the data scientists. But I think the most important problem, what I have observed while talking to a lot of data scientists and AI guys, that do we really finding some really better use case that utilize this data to come in a product that is useful for the farmer, small scale or large scale farmer. So I think the most important and the difficult part in this agriculture, again agriculture industry, is that data is not a problem, let's say, but finding the right use case to come up with a product is the problem. And if you have that, then you will be solving the problems of small to mid-scale farmer. Now, coming back to your question about giving an implementation of these kind of solution to the small mid-scale farmer. So if you see most of the agtech companies around the world, they are majorly designed for the large corporates or either large family farms, right? They are not designed for small to mid-scale farmer. They are the user, but they are not designed for them. And when we need to bring them into that ecosystem of the end user or maybe the buyer, I think we need to think in that way, that how we going to utilize these technologies or information to give them a kind of tool that they will start using. Because at the end of the day, if you talk about the big data and you really want those data from these farmers farm, you have to push or at least motivate them to enough to utilize or use your product, right? So I think the one approach, without promoting the company again, uh, I think the one approach we have to figure it out, that we need to do a lot of cost efficiency, right? We need to find out those ways that makes the a small to mid scale farmer providing an affordable solution. But when we talk about IoT, which is the most and first integrated part of getting these data, it's very difficult. And I think that's the reason you won't see a lot of IoT companies based out in India or in developing nations in Southeast Asia, while you will find some other ways, right? So I think this is point one. And I think the another thing, that agriculture is a very conventional industry, very conventional industry, right? So usually it works on the base of wisdoms. Hey, my grandfather used to be a farmer, and he shared his experience and wisdom to me, to my father, and then he shared with me, right? So I think that we need to break that part, like, because of course the wisdom was good 10, 20 years back, but when we talk about the climate change, the things change every day, the wisdom only cannot work, right? So I think we need to find these kind of combination of bringing that wisdom with your tech and providing a solution to the small scale farmer. The last point to add, which I think I've always shared during the where we have the meetings with the governments and the other stakeholder, in agriculture you have to be work together. You cannot be worked separately. I cannot call SatSure as my competitor or SatSure call someone else their competitor. If you really want to solve something in agriculture, especially in a country like India, you have to be all come together. And I think just to add what Parth has said, I think SatSure, I was part, like I was in a panel with Pradeep, who's the founder as well. So there was a lot of government and a lot of private institutions. They have created kind of committees and organizations in the last couple of years, and they're all working together. But we have to be very open. We have to be very willing to share these information. Then only you will be in a position where you will be providing a very productive, affordable solution for your small to mid scale farmer. And then if they start using it, give them free, give them paid, that doesn't matter. But if you are not allowing them to use your product, you won't get the enough information that will again help you out to make even much better product. So it's a cycle, right? If you really want to make your agriculture such an innovative and a research oriented industry, you have to initiate these information, you have to feed them, then you have to give something from them. So I think this is the approach we need to focus on.
Great. So we heard it from the horse's mouth, the both of the people associated with startups in these space, that to bring tech literacy, to bring this reliance on technology where it is most needed in our most crucial sectors, and to build a collaborative environment where we can create data that can, even compete with the Facebooks and the Twitters and other social platforms of the world. And for this, we need like an ecosystem where government bodies and private players are working hand to hand to actually bring affordable or even subsidized technological solutions where they are needed the most. With this, I've really enjoyed listening to the two of you. We'll just take a couple of audience questions before we wrap up the session. There's one question that's already present here by Varun Agrawal, which is that they note that there's this interesting point on the lack of data in the agricultural sensing stage, but there are so many agricultural universities in India. Then how is it possible that already these solutions have not been worked out and are not yet available? Whichever one of you would like to take this question, please.
Yeah, definitely. I'll take it up. So most of the agriculture universities, they are doing a lot of innovation in terms of improving the quality of seed, improving the quality of pesticide, fertilizers. So a lot of research, and you won't believe if I'm unfortunately those type of research are not coming out in public for public to see what kind of innovation is going there. But as Lalit has also pointed out, and we have discussed in this panel, that there is a lot of possibility of integration, and here comes this major challenge of how to integrate that kind of data with the data I am having, with the data say Lalit is having, and the other players in the ecosystem is having. And here comes the whole idea of the having the uniformity, the compatibility of the data, and to generate those use cases. So most of the agri universities in India, they're focused directly on the farmers, so their production levels, so their innovation, their research, R&D, everything goes into that. Uh, where we are trying to attack is more on the lines of data aggregation and understanding those data. So definitely we have our collaboration with a lot of agri universities in different parts of India to understand what are the, because in India also, due to the different agro climatic zones, the region, as per the region changes, a lot of things changes about the soil, about the agriculture activities being done. So we have taken their help, we are integrating those things, but definitely there's a lot to be done, and I hope in the times to come we get more opportunities to collaborate on that front.
Great. There's another quick question. Perhaps, Lalit, you can shed more light on that. So the question is, and I think this will be the final question, we are almost nearing the end time of the talk. As founders of agri-tech startups, what are some of the most common types of algorithmic biases or biases in the data that you come across?
No, I think that's a very interesting question. I think even one question was very important as well, and I think I'll combine these two to answer this one. Is first of all, we need to be, again, I'm repeating the same thing, that we have to be that humble and open to start sharing these informations, right? And I think I have to appreciate Plaksha here. It's not just because I'm here, but I think we need to think about the industry approach rather than academic approach. When the universities started in India, agriculture universities started in India, they are like 40 years old, 50-year-old, 30-year-old, right? They have that kind of old infra and the mindset as well. But when you have to be work with these kind of data and the technology, you have to be think as an industry point of view, startup point of view. So I think that's point one. The second point, the answer is also somehow related to this. The data. Look, there are tons of data, right? We work with the different universities in India and abroad. We work with the other stakeholders like the other private companies as well. Whether these data are enough and productive enough to convert into any product. I think these kind of, so when we talk about like converting the big data into a product, not all the kind of data considered to be converted into a product, right? You have to understand this. There's like a structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data. There are multiple things, right? So I think in the terms of algorithm bias, first of all, India is a very, very diverse. So I think this is something we have to be understand as well. When we talk about the US, you have mostly like there are only two types of kind of the demography you will find. Same goes in Europe as well. But even in India, you will find around like 20 types of demographics, right? So I think this is one of the challenge when even if I'm sharing the Kerala data, it's not going to be completely different from what we have in Rajasthan or is it different from Punjab. So I think these kind of the differentiation and the bias we will usually find. The second thing is that you have the data again available in the different sort of, so these are again available in the different kind of brackets, and all brackets need to become. And I think there's a initiative has been done by some of the folks, agricultural folks, called XTech and all these kind of open sources. I think these kind of initiative we need to bring into that part as well. And the second thing, the second thing to answer this question is that we also need to bring the current practices, because farmer, again, agriculture is a very conventional. We always use the hatu wala, that kind of tractor and all this thing for seeding and all this, right? John Deere tractor, all these such kind of tractor you won't find in Indian ecosystem, right? So I think these kind of the bias, it's all sometimes are very challenging, especially to work in the agriculture sector.
Right. Great. I mean, all great insights, and I'm getting to learn so much more of the ground reality of things from the two of you. There's one more question that's come from the team, and I promise that's going to be the last one. The question is, well, Netherlands is known to be a pioneer for precision agriculture. And do you think we'll be able to leverage the same kind of productivity gains? And I know you've already answered it in bits and pieces, but maybe one of you would like to piece it together. You've answered it with the fact that, that there's just not the kind of economy to invest in that sort of infrastructure which is needed for, let's say, drip irrigation, other things. You mentioned tractors, and then, but then what is the scenario that's now coming up to make it affordable, maybe not individually, but as a community?
I can start and then I allow Parth to add as well, because we based out near Netherlands, and we work a lot with the Netherlands and Dutch universities as well. So I think the most important is your priorities, right? It's a very tiny country, Israel and Netherlands. They are very tiny country, right? They may not have a lot of kind of population or agriculture based economies. But I think the one of the biggest thing that you will find, like in each and every universities of Netherlands or even the government public offices, they have set up these kind of the research departments which always involve in these kind of development, right? So for example, even though they are not agricultural based economy, but they have created the priorities in that way. They will always working on these kind of stuff, whether these are agriculture. They are also wonderful in the food tech industry as well, like these days plant-based meat and lab-based meat. So they're also doing this thing, sustainable packaging, circular economy and all. So I think this is all, that shows that how open and how willing you are to set these kind of R&D protocols as well. So I think the only thing what missing here, or what differentiate between Netherlands and India is your priorities, right? It's your openness of your government, because again, companies, startups cannot change the entire ecosystem. You have those big players or the decision makers have to come in that kind of role to make that happen. So maybe if Parth wants to add anything.
Yeah, greatly covered by Lalit, I think, with his on-ground experience in Netherlands. What I can say and add pointers to the later part of your question is that how can we do it in India? I think the kind of climatic emergency we are living in, people are being forced now to think in that direction very collectively, bringing in all stakeholders and as an ecosystem, not only just trying to push each other out of the ecosystem, but trying to be more open and collaborating, having that approach to innovation. So I'm pretty sure and all these decision makers, the players, the policy makers are also taking cognizance of this fact. And I hope with the kind of diversity we have in our country, not only in aspects of regions and people, but different strata of thinking, I hope in the years to come, there would be more consolidation in the sector. And based on that, we would be able to see more result-oriented approach in the years to come. So hopefully, good times for agtech industry in India, and let's see how things turn out.
Great, thank you both. So just to wrap up this very briefly with your comments, what we are aiming for is diversity in ecosystem, because we all know that the more diverse the ecosystem is, the stronger it is and the more sustainable it is. So essentially we want collaboration between academia, industry, and of course Plaksha and the startups and also the agri universities of India all coming together to sort of deliver this solution and under the sort of the watchful and also the supporting eye of the government and of the policymakers of the country. So thank you both so much, and I hope everybody enjoyed this panel as much as I enjoyed moderating this and talking to the both of you.